Hello, Lenawee County. My name is Brian Vish, and here's what's happening this week in Lenawee.
Accurate, dependable, and late breaking. This is local and state news on WLEN, Lenawee's local news station.
As part of our continuing coverage of the 2026 midterm election, I reached out to candidates seeking to represent Southeast Michigan in Congress. My goal is to give voters an opportunity to hear directly from the candidates about their backgrounds, priorities, and policy positions in a long form format that allows for more in depth discussion than is often possible in traditional news coverage. This week, I was joined by Democratic candidate Christian Vukasovich, who is seeking election to Michigan's 5th Congressional District seat. I have also reached out to incumbent Congressman Tim Walberg's office and am currently working to arrange a similar interview. I have also contacted Green Party candidate James Bronk and extended the same invitation. Here's my conversation with Christian Vukasovich. Hello, Lenawee County. I am here with Christian Vukasovich, who is running for Michigan's 5th District congressional representation. So, Christian, thank you very much for joining me here today.
Hey, thank you for having me, Brian. Appreciate the opportunity.
So, I figured we could just jump right into the interview with you
Sounds great.
without any issues there. And I did notice through some research that your background for a congressional candidate, not the typical background that we see nowadays. You're a union organizer, a scholar of media and war narratives. You're a professor. What problem in Congress do you think your background uniquely positions you to solve?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Brian. One of the things that struck me as I was running for office is how many of our problems, our policies that we have, really, they're everyday issues that impact you. Policy is not an abstract, it is something that hits us on the ground. And so I started my career, I worked my way through school as a bricklayer. I know what it takes to work every day, long hours with your hands, to go home, to see your family, to see my wife and my son. And we had a daughter that we were expecting, and to have to study all night and to have to figure out how I'm going to make that paycheck stretch to pay for diapers, for groceries. Those are real issues and real problems. And I don't think a lot of people in Washington right now have that experience. They don't have to make those tough choices. We've got a lot of career politicians who never had to make those kind of choices. And so whether it's as an educator, whether it was as a union organizer, whether it was as a bricklayer or as a, as a scholar, what I noticed was that policy, good policy, is something that impacts people's lives every day in what they do. And I saw that in how, when I'm teaching students, there are folks who are struggling at home. There's food insecurity. They have to work multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. Their families are struggling with things like childcare and housing security. And it impacts how those students can succeed, what they're bringing to the classroom. When I talk to my veterans who can't even sit through an entire class because of the shrapnel that's in their bodies, or engage with the materials as fully because of the PTSD that's hitting them, and how to make sure that they're succeeding with the GI Bill that's available to them. It reminds me that, these are real people with a diverse background and diverse issues and challenges they're facing them, but we all have a common goal that we're working for, and we have to succeed at that together. And whether that's changing people's lives as a union organizer and watching how that actually impacts their stability, how it makes the entire economy of the community stronger, to have that kind of security and that seat at the table. I mean, it just emphasizes the fact that we have an opportunity here to bring voices of people, everyday people, to Washington, in a place where far too many times it's career politicians who have no perspective.
So you think your background more as a blue collar worker would bring that kind of unique perspective? You were a bricklayer
Right.
for a little while there.
Right. I noticed the spalling on your building outside, though. But yeah, no, absolutely. You know, I think about everything and above, right? Because, working way through school, understanding what it takes to work a 12 to 14-hour shift.
It's a unique perspective.
It is a unique
Yeah.
perspective, but it's also a unique perspective to understand as a scholar doing research. I mean, I had to look deeply into issues and figure out what are the facts, not the
Mhm.
politics of the
Yeah,
issue, and how that's going to affect people on the ground.
absolutely.
And I think it's that broad breadth of experience that's really helpful.
Michigan's 5th district, I'm sure you know, is not a safe progressive district. And you have been associated with some pretty progressive policies in your campaign. So, what do you say to voters who may like your economic messaging, but might fear you're a little too far left for the district?
Well, it's interesting that people bring that up, whether it's a progressive policy, because I've been talking to folks all across the district. As you know, we have 5,000 square miles in our district. It's 10 counties, roughly coast to coast. And whether it's Democrats or Republicans or people who really don't consider themselves either, people just want practical solutions to their problems. They don't view affordable health care as progressive. They don't view being able to retire with dignity after working your entire life as progressive. They don't view the fact that they should have some kind of job security or that farmers need some kind of stability in order to make decisions. Those things are not progressive politics. They're just common sense. And what I'm finding from people across the district is that's what they're looking for is common sense.
You have no legislative voting record, obviously,
Right.
with you not having served. So, how should voters judge whether or not your politics are actually durable and not just campaign slogans?
Well, I don't think anybody should be ever listening to anybody's campaign slogans and judging them on that. And yeah, certainly I've never served in elected office before, but I have a background of results from my work. Every student that I've taught who ends up graduating and succeeding and getting a job, that's a result that I've created. And every time that when I organized a union, the result was it improved people's pay, it made their jobs more secure, it made sure that they had a seat at the table when it came to negotiating. Those are results that we see from the work that I've done. Heck, even as a bricklayer, I'd be able to see at the end of the day just how much I finished and how many homes we were able to clad in brick, how many foundations of stone we were able to put in. My entire life is about delivering results, results that actually solve problems and get things done for working people. And so, I would ask people to judge me on my background of results, on the research I produced that had an impact on policy, and also judge your current representative, no matter who that is, and whatever level of government that is. What are the results? Because we have people who've been in office for 16 years or more, career politicians, who really haven't delivered much in results for the people. And what I'm hearing across the district is people want to see something happening, something changing, their lives improving. And that's not progressive. That's just common sense.
Well, it is interesting you bring up, actually just getting things done and
Yeah.
working to make sure that things are having results. Like you said, whether that is my dad's a carpenter, so he does the same thing when it comes to like countertops and stuff. He'll go into restaurant. Oh, they didn't lay this right. There's a bubble here. Like he does the same thing that you do with the
I know.
brick.
I can't
It's
look at buildings the same way anymore.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like, but as we look at that, obviously that takes some compromise. That takes negotiating. What parts of your policies are non-negotiable, and where are
Right.
you willing to compromise?
Compromise is a tool,
Mhm.
right? Compromise is not a principle. And people who use compromise as a principle never make anybody happy and nothing ever gets done. I'm willing to work with anybody as long as the end result is it's going to make life better for the people in Michigan's 5th district. If it's going to build a better economy for people, if it's going to protect their rights, if it's going to make sure we enshrine their voting rights are not going to be harmed, if it's going to make sure that we have the infrastructure we need to develop our economy and to serve people's needs. When I talked to a man who really all he cared about in Jackson was his mountain bikes and his cats, that infrastructure is of critical importance to him. And we have a administration right now who just cut a spending bill. We had money allocated for infrastructure that was supposed to come down to our local communities, and it hasn't gotten there, and it has a direct effect on people's lives. It's really important that we are actually delivering on people, and I'll work with anybody, Democrat, Republican, Independent, if it means we're going to get closer. One of the things I'm hearing when I go door to door, when I'm making my phone calls, when I'm showing up at events and talking to people and getting their perspectives, is that they're really frustrated with the fact that everything seems to be about a culture battle. Everything seems to be about the latest argument on cable news, on the outrage machine that's out there. Nobody seems to be focusing on fixing their problems. And ultimately, that's what government is for. Government is supposed to solve your problems and then get the hell out of your way and let you move forward. And so I'll work with anybody. Things that are non negotiable to me are things that are non-negotiable to the people of our district, and that's protecting their Social Security, protecting their health care and access to health care, making sure we protect their rights, their constitutional rights, making sure that we protect their voting rights, all of these things, making sure that we have an infrastructure in place that allows businesses to thrive, making sure we have a farm bill that's going to allow farmers to make decisions. All of those things, those are the things that are not things that I'll compromise on. But if we can get there, even if we disagree on the hows, I'll work together with anybody.
Policy obviously is huge, and that is a huge focus for a lot of folks nowadays. It- Medicare has come up a lot, medicine, healthcare, stuff like that. And we just had a lot of folks who lost access to that healthcare.
Right.
My brother is one of them.
Oh,
He has
geez.
lost access to some support he needed. Do you support Medicare for all?
Yeah, I think universal health care, it's not just a healthcare issue, first and foremost. It's an economic issue for our entire district, for our entire country right
Mhm.
now. How much money is being spent at this point on a healthcare system that, frankly, is substandard around the world. Every other developed nation in this world has a universal health care. It doesn't follow you from, it doesn't come to you from your job. It follows you wherever you go. And that's because healthcare should be a right of everybody. It's not something that's a privilege because of how much money you have or who your employer is. Universal healthcare would allow people to be able to move from job to job and still not lose their coverage. It would allow people to take risks and open a small business and try to get ahead in life. It would allow people who are laid off, heaven forbid, to retain their coverage. And it would allow people who are small businesses to attract top talent because they don't have to worry about the costs of that. I mean, right now, our healthcare coverage in America is a hot mess. I mean, we have a business model for the healthcare industry, which is based on, denying claims, delaying claims, fighting and defending against those in court. It's getting more and more expensive every year. I talked to a tool and die maker in Jackson, Michigan, who had been, I mean, this was phenomenal. He covered the entire cost of healthcare for his workforce every year. And this is the first time he he was absolutely distraught. He could not provide the same level of coverage. He had to drop them down a tier of coverage on this. But he told me his costs have been going up on average 15% a year. And I don't know any other industry that can just keep raising your prices 15% a year and getting away with it. I mean, back when he had 30 some employees, he was paying $40,000 a year to make sure that they were covered with healthcare. Now he's got 10 employees and it's costing him $140,000 a year to cover them. And that's insane. And we're giving massive aid to countries around the world who have universal healthcare. Mexico has an economy that's 1/17 the size of ours, and they have universal healthcare. I mean, we can have it here, and we need to be asking why we don't have it here. And, I know that people have been hearing all kinds of stories. They're worried. What about my coverage? Will it drop? But people can still have supplementary insurance. It'll just force those insurance companies, instead of a business model based on denying claims and refusing to pay out money, if everybody's covered by a base universal level, then they have to actually offer something substantial in order to get that and say, here, I'm going to give you something extra. I'm going to give you even more coverage for your rehab and recovery. I'm going to give you something that's going to cover to get you a private room stay so you don't have to share with a roommate. All of these issues are things that other countries do very well. And there's no reason in Michigan that 700 to 750,000 people should be right here in our state should be now priced out of healthcare because of the cuts that were made in this big ugly bill that was passed.
I mean, digging further into this too, like, what does that transition look like? I mean,
Right.
especially when we're talking about rural areas where we have workers who are at these hospitals, or even people who are working in the insurance industry currently as it is structured. How do we make that transition where we're making it as easy as possible and minimizing the amount of negative impact that we see?
One of the things that we're going to see right away is the costs that go down. Right. You're not going to be paying copays. You're not going to be paying deductibles. Right. You're not going to have a lot of out of pocket expenses in this. Universal healthcare is just that. It's universal. It's going to include your dental. It's going to include your vision. It's going to include mental health care. And we already have a framework for it that we just need to build off of. We already have a Medicare, Medicaid program that we can expand. And obviously, some of that has been, undercut or kneecapped because we've had policies that have tried to privatize more of that and put it back into the hands of the very same private insurance companies that have been taking advantage of people for so long. But what we're going to see are doctors who can focus on providing care to their patients, who don't have to spend hours on the phone trying to argue why a routine procedure for something should be covered. We will have rural hospitals that can stay in business because they don't have to worry about whether the people who walk through their door for care are covered or not. We've got workers who can go and, get seen. People, retired people can go and get seen and get the care they need without having to worry if something's out of their network and whether or not something's going to be considered inpatient or outpatient. Right now, health insurance companies switch the rules. So if you're in the hospital, used to be if you were in the hospital for over 23 hours, they considered that inpatient care. They switched the rules to 56 hours. And there's people who go in, they get care, they've been there for almost 2 days, right? And they go home thinking everything's covered. And then a couple of weeks later, they get a massive bill for $7,000, $8,000 in the mail. I mean, that's just insane. This is no way to run healthcare in the richest country in the world.
Yeah, and I definitely would agree, especially with that, because I've experienced myself with some stuff in my past. But like, so I guess more specifically, I'm gonna keep in perspective of things that I actually I've
Right.
experienced with here. My mom was a receptionist at a doctor's office. So let's say she's working for an insurance company, who obviously that's privatized. It's not the system that's the system we're in right now.
Right.
What happens when we transition to Medicare for all, to that universal model, to the people who, not the doctors, because they're going to be fine. We're going to need the
Well,
doctors there.
we always need doctors and nurses and
But
staff.
what about the folks like my mom, who was the receptionist? Who,
Oh,
what is there a path? That's more or less, I guess, my concern in a transition
right.
is the people who often get forgotten in
Right.
that scenario.
Well, we're always going to need the receptionists. We're always going to need people who are keeping the records. We're always going to need folks who are able to do the billing. What changes is it's streamlining the billing. It's making it easier. It's making sure that there is a single point of contact that you no longer have to spend the time arguing with insurance companies on that. Over time, we would see a rollout that would probably hit folks in the older age brackets first, and then roll down over the course of maybe 4 or 5 years until everybody's covered under this model. What it's going to do is it's going to make a lot of things more profitable, obviously, because the costs are going to go down. The only real industry that is going to experience a hit is the health insurance industry that has been flying high and raking in billions of dollars with, frankly, an unethical business model that denies care to the people who've paid for it.
Yeah.
And so forcing them to have to transition to actually offering something of value, I don't see that as a negative for the people in our district. I don't think that's a negative for our country. That's a net positive for all of us.
Thinking of policy still.
Yeah.
I'm going to kind of change gears a little bit on you here. It's a slightly different lane. Immigration reform, border enforcement.
Right.
That's another big topic and a big issue that we are facing currently as a society. So, when it comes to ICE, are you in favor of keeping ICE or abolishing ICE?
Well, before I talk about that, why I'm in favor of abolishing ICE.
I figure we get
Right.
into that as
Yeah.
well. Yes, yeah.
I think it's important to understand that I don't think any of us disagree that we need a strong border security. Every single country in the world wants to know who's coming over the border and wants to keep criminals out. That's basic common sense. And I don't care if you're talking to progressives or, conservatives or every moderate in between. Everybody agrees on that. I agree on that. That's really important to have strong border protections. But we're going about it all wrong in many ways. Like in this rush towards, we're violating people's constitutional rights. We're violating rights to due process. And once you take away one person's or one group's right to due process, you've now taken away from every single American, every single person in this country. We're violating rights to the writ of habeas corpus on this. And it's not just here or there. It's systematic all the way through. It's an agency that believes it can operate outside of the Constitution. At the same time, we are defunding the very immigration courts and the judges that we need to actually go through the case law and determine who should be here, who has a right to be here, and who doesn't. We're picking people up who show up for their citizenship interviews and just grabbing them. They did everything right. They followed all the rules. They went to all the hearings. They are there to swear in as citizens, and we're grabbing them and deporting them outside of the country. I mean, we're picking people up off the streets and disappearing them into a system where we don't even know where they've disappeared to. Their family can't find answers. Their lawyers can't find answers. When we talk about ICE, I mean, obviously, we need immigration enforcement. We need strong border security. But we also need something that works. We don't have to choose between border security and constitutional rights. That's insane to try to say you get one or the other. And if we've seen an agency that from top to bottom, from its leadership down to the agents in the field, have a total disregard for the lives of the people that they're impacting, the safety. They are shooting tear gas canisters through the windows of minivans full of kids, who are grabbing people who are U.S. citizens and taking them and detaining them, who are grabbing people like here in Adrian. We had somebody that they grabbed who's been here for 35 years. He has a valid work visa. He renewed every 5 years. They pulled him out of his truck. When his friends went to get the truck so it wouldn't be towed, his papers were right all over the dashboard, proving that he was legally allowed to be here. But they didn't care. They took him anyway. So what that tells me is that this is much bigger than just a few rogue apples, bad apples in this. This is a problem throughout the culture of the agency. It's a system problem, and we need to start over and do it right. So that's why I don't think ICE is reformable. I think we just need to start over and make sure that we have the people who respect the Constitution and will do the job professionally. Absolutely.
So, what do you think replaces that? Is it an organization that kind of enforces it in a similar way, or is it something more like an oversight? What does that look like to you?
I mean, yes and yes, right? So obviously, we're going to have an agency that's in charge of immigration enforcement that we can trust. And we're going to have to make sure that we have professionals who are well trained in order to do that work. But that also means making sure we're funding the immigration court system so that we can go through and vet who's supposed to be here, who's not, what are legitimate, valid asylum claims, and we can get through those quickly so that somebody who doesn't have a valid asylum claim doesn't get to stay here for forever before that's determined. And people who do have valid claims are able to progress on and become really contributing members of our society. That means funding those courts. That means not kneecapping those investigative efforts. But it also means making sure that the American people can trust that system, to making sure that when somebody comes in here legally and they follow the rules and they do what we tell them to do, they can live a life without fear, that they have some security, that they can build a life here and contribute to our society and contribute to our communities without just being arbitrarily ripped out of their homes.
Keeping in the vein of policy,
Right.
but moving more towards foreign policy, as it were. Uh, Especially in your dissertation, you heavily criticize war making and media narratives around such things. Um, so it very very relevant, I would
Right.
say, in our modern times. How would your views on that affect your votes on things like Ukraine, Israel, and Gaza, the Iran war that's going on currently, and just general defense spending?
I can sum up my position on war and conflict in this way in American defense is I really believe there's three things that we need. We need strong defense, right? We need strong alliances, and we need fewer wars. And if we have and maintain strong alliances and we maintain a strong defensive capability, the strength of a nation is not how many wars you fight. It is, the peace and prosperity you bring to your people. And when I was talking at the livestock auction over in Hillsdale County a number of weeks ago, and I was talking to a gentleman who served his eighth tour in Iraq the same year his son served his first tour there. And that's just unacceptable to have multi-generational wars. For what gain? For no gain, right? The lives lost, the immense cost to our nation when it comes to that. So it's important that we are prepared and engaged to defend democracy, to defend our freedoms, to defend our economic interests. That's very important. With Ukraine, it's much cheaper to fight a fire when it's small than to try to put out an inferno later. And we have seen what happens when we appease aggressors who want to take more and more land and take over more countries. It eventually becomes a problem that's very difficult to fight. It's going to be much more costly. So, right now, supporting Ukraine is a far cheaper, far safer alternative than having to deal with this, kick this can down the road, and then having to deal more directly with Russia later. When it comes with the Israeli Palestinian conflict, there is not a single problem in this world. There's not a single issue where an appropriate response is bombing children. And Israelis deserve to live in security without fear of terrorism. Palestinians deserve to live with security and with prosperity and with a sovereign nation and their own rights as well. And the only real solution to this problem, nobody's going anywhere over there, is to have a peaceful coexistence where everybody has a stake in that. And we have power over that. We give a tremendous amount of aid. We can attach conditions to that aid that force people to behave in accordance with humanitarian law, with international law, with the kind of ideals that we as America want to see. And we should use that power. We should bring people in line towards a lasting and sustainable future. And the same can be said with Iran. We've got the power to bring people to the negotiating table. It's very difficult now that we started this war to try to bring it back there. That was, incredibly ill-advised. But we have to do it. It's hard when we've pissed off our neighbors, when we've threatened our allies, and now we're asking them for help. But we are going to have to get them to come over and help be part of the solution. Because let's face it, the globe is facing a recession because of the Strait of Hormuz, because of the world's fertilizer supply, 2/3 of it, which come through there, which is affecting our farmers. Even if we can afford to buy that fertilizer that's there, the prices on that are going to be in a bidding war because the supply is going to be a lot smaller. The oil and the cost for our constituents gassing up the tank. I have 15 gallons in my tank. It costs me close to $80, maybe even more sometimes, just to fill up the tank. Can people even afford to go to work with this? And so leveraging alliances so that there's a lot of people with skin in the game, making sure that we have used diplomacy that's backed by strength, making sure that we can verify, because we certainly don't want Iran to have nuclear capability. We had something in place that was verifying that they didn't have that. International observers, our own intelligence agencies were saying they have stopped enrichment. They are not producing anymore. We have verified this. For some reason, this administration decided they were going to throw that out the window. And then in the middle of negotiations to try to get it back, we decided we weren't going to negotiate anymore. We were just going to start a war. It's tough. It's going to be hard, but we have to get back to those negotiations. We have to have it verified. We have to be backed up, snapback sanctions and other things in place so that we give them a reason to follow through. We're not trusting anybody's goodwill on this. We have to make sure that we are backed by force. But ultimately, the whole world, and our economy included, our district here needs that strait to be opened.
Mhm.
And nobody here wants to send their kids to another forever war in the Middle East.
No.
Right.
So, would you say your approach is similar to the philosophy of Teddy Roosevelt? You speak softly and carry a big stick. To have that force to back you up, but use your words and speak softly first, because that should be how we
I mean,
engage.
absolutely. And I'll tell you this, and this is what really bothers me with a lot of career politicians in Washington, is these are people who don't have a skin in the game. Our men and women in uniform, they're not toy soldiers. These are husbands and mothers, these are sons and daughters, brothers and sisters. These are real people with real lives. And we owe it to them. They are ready to make that sacrifice for our country. We do not throw that away flippantly. We use every diplomatic tool at our disposal before we resort to force, because that's just a smart, common sense way to do diplomacy. And when you can use diplomacy to get what you want, it's not only going to be a lot less lives lost, it's going to be far cheaper. It's going to increase our power around the world. Instead of showing off where we're weakest because we didn't plan.
So your campaign talks a lot about obviously the working people of the country, the farmers and the union folks. What would be the first three district specific things that you would want to work on if you were elected?
I would say that every politician should be focused on the working people in their district. That's who elects you. That's who you're working for. It's your seniors who have retired. It's your farmers who are feeding the nation, because food security is national security when we talk about that. It's going to be the manufacturing base that is creating our economy that's here. It's the small businesses that sustain our communities, and we have to be working for every single one of those. But without consumers, without people, everyday people who can afford to buy things, can afford to live their lives, who are, instead of just getting by paycheck to paycheck, are able to actually thrive and get ahead, all of this is going to fall apart. It's a big snowballing problem. And so what's important is to bring in the basis of investment in there. I don't want government to run our economy, but what government does and can do well is to create that infrastructure that's needed. A great example of this is broadband. The modern economy runs on the internet, and yet we have wide areas of our district that they don't have broadband access. Farmers need broadband in order to do their business. We need rural communities who have kids going to school who need broadband. We have small businesses who need that to compete, because otherwise Amazon's just going to steamroll them when it comes to doing business. And yet we had money allocated by the federal government to put in that infrastructure. I mean, we have people who watched as they put in the pipes that they were running the cables through out in front of their houses. And then this government decided, with the big, beautiful bill, they stopped a lot of this funding. It just dried up. The connection from their house just never happened. We need that infrastructure in order to build our economy. We need good roads and bridges, infrastructure for transportation and rail, so that we can make sure that we have the economic base for businesses to want to come here. We need to make sure that we have the the communication infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure, in order to make sure that they have a workforce that's going to be here and that can be served. Without that basis, who's going to invest in things? I mean, right now investment's really tough. We've got trade policies that are changing almost daily. We got tariffs that are just swinging with the wind. We've got energy policy that changed when people started gearing up for renewable energy, which we need to put in more renewable energy. We want energy independence so we don't have to fight wars in the Middle East over this. Those policies, they just come and they go. They cut funding without any notice. We have a farm bill that was delayed for years. And when I asked at the Farm Bureau interview a couple weeks back, how many people in that room had to delay and making a decision on what they were going to plant, what they were going to raise, how they were going to do their business, right? Every single hand went up in that room because they were waiting on politicians to get that done. And so obviously infrastructure development, it's a great opportunity to put people to work in good paying jobs. That's going to translate to more money infusing across our communities. It's going to provide the basis for us to build our economy, and it's going to improve the lives of everybody who's living there. And ultimately, that's what government's for, is to improve your life. And that's how we should be judging government, is how much has that improved our lives. And if you look at how government has worked for you over the last 10, 20 years, you should be asking, what has it delivered to me that improves my life? And if the answer is not a hell of a lot, then it's time to switch it up and try something new. Absolutely.
Kind of going back to that, what
Yeah.
are the results that we're
Exactly.
looking for?
Right.
Absolutely. So I know critics might say that your campaign will sound more activist than legislative. What bills, committees, or bipartisan relationships would actually turn those ideas into those results?
I don't know this term activism. If activist is showing up and listening to people, yeah, I mean, I show up across the district. I show up to town halls. I show up to you know, specially scheduled meet and greets. I show up to meet people at the American Legion where they're having breakfast. At the NAACP, because your job as a representative is to listen to people, to let them tell you what their challenges are, their problems are, and then to fix it. That's your job. That's what they elected you for. I don't view that as particularly activist. I think that's common sense. That's what people want. I don't know why other candidates or politicians aren't doing that. I mean, I was just last week ago, actually, in Niles for an NAACP meeting, and my opponent just didn't show up last minute. And people were really frustrated with the inability to ask him questions and to get straight answers and to have him hear how these policies, many of them he'd been voting for, are impacting their lives and how he could better change their lives and their futures, with his work. I've had a lot of jobs where, the metrics of success, they can be misleading. But when you're somebody's representative, that's easy. You find out, they'll tell you what their problem is. It's your job to try to fix that and to explain yourself along the way. And I don't think that's particularly activist. I think that what we're looking at is just making real improvements on people's lives that they're going to experience and they're going to see for themselves based on what they're telling us.
What would you think would be something a progressive voter might disagree with you on?
Brian, I don't think progressive voters are a big monolithic group. Just the same way that conservative voters aren't monolithic. Obviously, nobody's ever going to agree with you on everything. That's important. People are going to disagree on substantive issues. People are going to disagree on procedural issues, how we're going to do something. My job is to listen to them, to understand what is happening to them in their lives and what they need, to explain myself in what I'm doing, and to make sure that the work I'm doing is for the betterment of this district and the people who are living here, the voters who voted me into office, every single one of them, whether they voted for me or not, all of my constituents. And so, I don't know that there's anything that progressive voters right now are disagreeing with me on. I'm sure these things happen. But ultimately, if we're focused on improving people's lives, everybody here in this district is very common sense. They're very pragmatic in what they're looking for, and they just want problems solved. And if you're working towards that, I think that the only questions they might have is, what are your priority, and how fast are we doing this, and how fast should we be changing? But ultimately, we all agree on where we need to go and what needs to be done.
So, in similar vein that to the previous question,
Right.
if we're looking at a conservative voter, what would be something that you think they'd be like, "Oh wow, I agree with this guy on," aside from the Medicare stuff that we've discussed?
Right. Well, I mean, I think a lot of conservatives who maybe hadn't been following me very closely would be surprised that, I agree with them. We need border security. I agree with them that we need to make sure that our government programs are efficient
Mhm.
and that, that we don't have a lot of waste. I agree with them that make sure that we are serving the people and not just putting money into the hands of big corporate welfare, recipients. I feel, the same way that they do, that if you work a hard day's work, you should be able to pay the bills. If you worked your whole life, you should be able to retire in dignity. I don't think that that's an area of much disagreement among voters, regardless of your party. I think we have a lot of politicians who just fail to deliver on that, or who don't seem to think that the well being of their constituents is as important as the donors who are putting money in their pockets. But when we talk about people across the board, progressive, independent, moderate, conservative, we all pretty much want the same thing, and that's just results that improve our lives. You know,
So, if elected, this will be our final question for
right?
us today. If elected, how do you see yourself bringing federal dollars and creating pathways for new industry here in Michigan's 5th District?
Our problem here in Michigan's fifth district is not that we don't have the talent. We have the talent, and we have already started creating pipelines. Like a couple months back, I was in Jackson for Jackson College's opening of a brand new technical career center that they have there. Um, it's not that we don't have opportunity. We have an auto industry base here that's par excellence. It is fantastic. We have the third largest agricultural industry in the country in Michigan. We have a lot of opportunities. We could be growing biofuels and supporting our farmers at the same time, retooling and able to start creating farm equipment that runs on those biofuels with our automotive technology. We should be expanding, they're already expanding the Port of Monroe into a world class port. We can be expanding and upgrading our infrastructure. We can be providing good paying jobs locally so people don't have to leave the county, leave the district in order to find a future for themselves. We have all that opportunity. The only thing that's really standing in our way is chaos, Because as I mentioned, who wants to invest when you don't know if that population is going to be, still get the education they need to join your workforce, because we're cutting funding for education, whether or not we're going to have the energy needs in order to sustain that, whether or not the tariffs are going to be affecting that and profitability. How can you hire and invest in facilities and equipment when you don't know day to day what the plan is? So that means we need long-term stability. We need programs that are thought through, that we continue through, and make sure that they provide the stability for our economy here at home. And then people can make decisions.
Mentioning like the industry's bringing people and keeping them here. We were starting to kind of try that with new industries back when I was starting college with film.
Right.
And that was part of it. It was, let's train a bunch of people up. Well, then they pulled those jobs out. So that really wasn't a federal thing. That was a state level thing.
Right.
So I know that's not something that necessarily you would have been able, and if you were in that position, or even our current representative could have done, like directly to. But how do you pressure the state when they do something like that? Because that did impact us in a way where we lost nearly an entire generation. We did lose out on industry that's now in Atlanta, Georgia. And
Right.
we all know that Atlanta's thriving very nicely now. Um,
Yeah,
and
actually, we lost
considering,
that there.
yeah, and considering we left jobs unfinished from that time period, we left money on the table as well.
Right.
So, as a representative who wants to try to bring new industry in, what do you do to try and pressure the state level representatives who kind of pull the rug out from people in that instance, or in a future instance similar to that?
One of the issues is it's not just at the state level that we're pulling the rug out. At the federal level, we're doing that too. Anything that a previous administration put in tends to be looked at as poison, no matter whether it was effective or not. We need to be judging whether this was doing what it intended to do, whether it looks like it's on track to deliver on what was, what was promised. I think maintaining those incentives makes it difficult. When we have people, though, who are willing to walk away from money on the table, money that's already been allocated to support this, I think it's important to put the pressure on and communicate to the constituents just what they're doing and how they're kneecapping. I don't think that it's out of bounds to talk to that directly as a federal representative, to talk very candidly about, this is what we've enabled, this is the programs we put in place, this is how we're feeding this down through the states and that the states have started, and this is what is at risk to you, because there are certain players in this who seem to want to just ditch it for their own political gain. And let's go ahead and put the pressure on them, because frankly, politicians should be afraid of their constituents and what they think. They should not be dismissive of what's going to work for them because they're driven by their own ideological or their own, big donor interests on that.
Well, I want to thank you for stopping in here with us today, Christian. This was really awesome of you to stop by, and Adrian.
Hey, thank you, Brian, and thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you very much, Lenawee County, for joining us. This was Christian
Vukasovich.
Christian Vukasovich. I'm going to leave that in.
Yeah.
And he is running for Michigan's 5th Congressional District. Go ahead and take a look at his campaign, and thank you very much for tuning in. We will see you next week. And that'll wrap it up for us here this week in Lenawee. My name is Brian Vish for WLEN, Lenawee's award-winning local news station.
Count on WLEN, Lenawee's local news station, to keep you informed with accurate and dependable information 24 hours a day.